My name is CH Vinay Bharadwaj and I am from Triple E first year of section A. Today I am going to touch on the topic about Python PPT, and my topic is about what is Flask. What is Flask? Okay. What is Flask? Flask is a web application framework written in Python. It was developed by Armin Ronacher, who led a team of international Python enthusiasts called POCO. Flask is based on Werkzeug WSGI toolkit and the Jinja 2 template engine. Both are POCO projects. See, the information about the sentences. The meaning of the above sentences is nothing but Flask is a web application framework written in Python. In Python, Flask is nothing but it is a type of web application written in Python. Okay, and it was developed by Armin Ronacher. Who is Armin Ronacher? He is a international Python enthusiast called POCO. He is a team of international Python enthusiasts called POCO. And Flask is Flask is based on WSGA toolkit, Werkzeug WSGA toolkit. Okay, and Jinja 2 templates engine, both are POCO projects. WSGI toolkit and the Jinja 2 template engine, both are POCO projects. And Flask is based on Werkzeug WSGA toolkit and the Jinja 2 template engine. Okay, WSGA stands for the Web Server Gateway Interference, which is also called as Web Server Gateway Interference. In shortcut, we call it as WSGI. WSGI has been used as a standard for Python web application development. WSGI is the specification of common interference between web servers and web applications. See, the meaning of these sentences is nothing but WSGI. The full form of WSGI is nothing but the Web Server Gateway Interference. It has been used to standard for Python web application development. WSGI is used for standard for Python web application development. WSGI is the specification of common interference between web servers and web applications. What is Werkzeug? Werkzeug is a WSGI toolkit that implements request response objects and utility functions. This enables a web frame to be built on it. The Flask framework uses Werkzeug as one of its bases. See, the meaning of these sentences is nothing but Werkzeug is a WSGA toolkit that implements request response objects and utility functions. It is a WSGA toolkits. Werkzeug is a WSGA toolkits which implements request response objects and utility functions. Okay, next, Jinja 2. Jinja 2 is a popular template engine for Python. A web template system combines a template with a specific data source to render a dynamic web page. It is a popular template engine for Python. Jinja 2 is a popular template engine for Python. Next, why is Flask a good web framework choice? Why is a Flask a good web framework choice? Unlike the Django framework, Flask is a very Pythonic. It's easy to get started with Flask because it doesn't have a huge learning curve. On top of that, it's very explicit, which increases readability. To create the Hello World app, you only need a few lines to code. See, the meaning of these lines is nothing but unlike the Django framework, Flask is very Pythonic. It's easy to get started with the Flask. It is Django framework Flask is a very Pythonic and it is easy to get start. It doesn't have huge learning curve. Flask doesn't have any huge learning curve. It is easy and it gets easy to start. On top of that, it's very explicit and increases readability. Next, see, here is an example. This is a boilerplate code example. This is a code which is known as boilerplate code example. See, from this we can say that from Flask import Flask. Then next app is equals to Flask open parenthesis underscore name underscore score closed parenthesis. Then next at the rate app dot root open parenthesis uh, slash closed parenthesis. Next def hello uh, underscore world open parenthesis close parenthesis, and this is known as the boilerplate code example. If you want to develop on your local computer, you can do so easily. Save this program as server.py and run it with py server.py. See, if you want to develop a local computer, if you want to develop your local computer, you can do some easily. Save some programs like server.py. If you see, here is an example for server.py. You can save this example as server.py. See, the next point, it then starts a web server which is available only on your computer in a web browser. Open localhost on port 5000 open parenthesis in brackets the URL, and you'll see the hello world show up. See, features. What are the features? Number one is development server and debugger. Number two is integrated support for unit testing. Number three is RESTful request dispatching. Number four is uses Jinga templating. Number five is support for secure cookies, silent side sessions. Okay. Number six is 100% is WSGI 1.0 compliant. Number 7 is Unicode based. Number 8 is extensive documentation. Number 9 is Google App Engine compatibility. Number 10 is extensions available to enhance future design. Okay. See, development server and debugger. It develops server and debugger. Number 2, integrated support for unit testing. There will be an integrating support for the unit testing, RESTful request dispatching, and so and so. Then what's next? What you can do with Flask? We can do the following points. Number 1 is blog app. With the help of Flask, we can do blog app, social network web app, weather app, portfolio website, feedback form, REST API app, deploying machine learning models using Flask app. Okay, these are the these are the features that we can do with by using Flask. See, next, what are the advantages of Flasks? There are some advantages by using Flask. What are they? They are number one, higher compatibility with at least technologies. Sorry, higher compatibility with latest technologies. Technical experimentation. Second one, easier to use for simple cases. And third one, code base size is relatively smaller. Number 4, high scalability for simple applications. Next one, easy to build a quick prototype. Next one, routing URL is easy. Routing URL is easy. And last one is easy to develop and maintain applications. These are the advantages of Flask. Then what are the disadvantages of Flask? See, here are some points that are disadvantages of Flask. Number one, it is not suitable for big applications. Okay, it is not suitable for big applications. Next one is community. And the next one is full stack experience. Number 4 is no admin site. Number 5 is no login or authentication. And next one is ORM. Last one is migrations can be difficult. Why we use Flask technology for web development? What is the reason? What is the reason that we use Flask technology for web development? See, here is the reason. Flask is a popular open source and feature rich micro web framework to make all kinds of web applications. Know more about the important features of Python Flask that your next web page development project. See, Flask is a popular open source and feature rich micro web framework to make all kinds of web applications. I mean, the meaning of that is Flask is generally a popular and open source feature for all kind of web applications. That's it. And there are another some uses of Flask technology for web development. What are they? They are extensible web framework, support for cookies, lightweight and modular, high flexible, open source, hence free, highly secure, Google App Engine compatible. Last one is 100% WSGI 1.0 compliant. Okay, all are good. Then how to install Flask? There are few steps that help us to install Flask. How can we install Flask? The following steps help us how to install Flask. Step 1. Install virtual environment. Install virtualen on Linux. Step 2. Create an environment. Create an environment in Linux and Mac OS. Step 3. Activate the environment. Activate the environment in Linux and Mac OS. Step 4. Install Flask. Step 5. Test the development environment. See, from in here, step 1, step 2, step 3, we have to do for both. For install virtual environment, install virtual and Linux, and same steps for step 1, step 2, step 3. We have to install in both. We have to install in environment in Linux and also in Mac OS, so that we can install Flask. Is Flask a front-end or backend? Okay, is Flask a front-end or backend? In web development, there is only one front-end language, and that's JavaScript. And things compiled to JavaScript like TypeScript. Everything else runs under server somewhere, not in the browser, and that makes it backend. Flask, which is written in Python, is backend. See here, the meaning of is just nothing but it's very simple. Is Flask is front end or back end? Just Flask is a back end. It's not a front end. Which is better, Flask or Django? Django is considered to be more popular because it provides many out-of-box features and reduces times to build complex applications. Flask is a good start if you are getting into web development. Flask is simple, unappointed framework. It doesn't decide what your application should look like, developers do. See, the meaning of this above sentence is nothing but Flask is good, but also Django is good. Then why people consider more Django when compared to Flask? Because there is one reason. Because it has more out of box features when compared to Flask. But Flask is a good start to get into web development. It is very easy and unappointed framework. It doesn't decide what your application should look like. There are features in Flask, but when compared to Django, Flask has less features. So people consider more Django than Flask. That's it. It doesn't mean Flask is not better than Django. I mean Flask is not good, Django only is good. Django is good and also Flask is good. But people consider more Django than Flask because it has more features. I mean it has more out of box features when compared to Flask. That's it. But Flask is a good start if you are getting into web development. Okay. Next one is Flask a Python module? Flask is a web framework. It is Python module that lets you develop web application easily. We have already studied that Flask is a Python web framework, etc. Is Flask a Python module? Yes, Flask is a Python module. Who use Flask? Around 1,400 companies reportedly use Flask in their tech stacks, including Netflix, Reddit, and LYFT. See, overall, if we consider many companies uses Flasks, there are 1,445, approximately 1,445 companies were using present Flask. In that, main Netflix, Reddit, and LYFT. Some famous companies like Netflix, Reddit, and LYFT are also using this Flask. So that we can understand Flask is also very popular. It is easy. It is good for web development, etc. and etc. Is Flask used in industry? Industry do use Flask, but more complex web apps are built on Django. Django's modularity makes it easier for multiple developers to work on different apps in one project. Flask doesn't import any feature by default. It enables a developer to get a clean app. See, the meaning of this sentence is just now we have discussed that Django consists of more features when compared to Flask, right? See here, Django can run multiple developers to work on the different apps. Django can run. It makes easier to multiple developers to work on different apps in one project, whereas Flask doesn't do that. Next, companies using Flask. See, there are several companies. Just now we have discussed there are 1045 plus companies are using Flask. Here are some companies who are using present Flask: Red Hat, Fedora, and Pagura Infrastructure, OpenStack, Baker, Bodhi, OpenShift.io, Ansible, it's nothing but Jinja, Federal Loves Python.org, and many internal tools and APIs. See, next one, Rackspace. Next company, Airbin.airflow. See, just now we have discussed Netflix, LYFT, Python Anywhere, Reddit, Mailgun. These are some companies which are using Flasks. What is the largest site created using Flask? Pinterest happens to be the biggest site which has been created using the Flask web framework, as stated by Steve Chauhan, who happens to be API guy at Pinterest. Chauhan also calls Flask Pinterest's core technology, and that Pinterest has been using this web framework since late 2011, which is the largest site created using Flask. Pinterest is the largest site created using Flask, and this was said by Steve Chauhan, who is a API guy at Pinterest. Okay, is Flask easy to learn? As I said, Flask is a great Python framework for web development. It's beautiful, elegant, lightweight, and easy to learn. It also has a lot of community support in case you need extra help and create. There are also a lot of code examples you can find to do almost anything related to web development in Flask. See, the meaning of is nothing but, is Flask easy to learn? Yes, of course Flask is very easy to learn, and there is an information that it takes overall 1 week or 1.5 week, overall 2 weeks, approximately 2 weeks. It takes 2 weeks to learn Flask. So by that way we can understand that Flask is very easy to learn, and it has very good open coding platform, etc. and etc. What are templates in Flask? Templates are files that contain static data as well as placeholders for dynamic data. A template is rendered with specific data to provide a final document. Flask uses the Django template library to render templates in your application. You will use templates to render HTML, which will display in the user browser. See, the meaning of this nothing but, templates are the files that contain static data as well as placeholders for dynamic data. Templates are nothing but, it is a static data, it contains a static data as well as placeholders in dynamic data. Okay, is Flask free to use? Django and Flask are both free, open source, Python based web frameworks designed for building web applications. Yeah, Flask is very easy to use. Not only Flask but also Django. These both are free to use. These both are open source Python based web frameworks designed by building web applications. And last, thank you everyone. But before going to end the session, I need to say a few lines about Python. Nowadays Python is very famous. It's not only used for CSE but it also used for core branches, different branches like ECE, EEE, Aero, Civil, Mechanical, etc. So Python is also a very easy learning, easy coding platform, which is easy for us to learn. That's it. Thank you one and all.